My wife, 26 female, and I, 28 male, were married for 10 days, in a relationship for 4 years. It was at this point that she started acting guilty and closed off. We had just returned home from our honeymoon, and she'd been back to work as a bartender for 3 nights. When she came home from work that night, she was later than normal, and I could tell something was off. She got into the shower first, even though it was 3 a.m. She wore more clothes to bed than usual, and laid curled up on the edge instead of cuddling close like she usually did. My wife and I became each other's best friend. Since COVID, we had grown as a couple and as individuals. We had to work through arguments, disagreements, bad moods, and hopelessness. We watched a lot of informational videos about psychology and relationships together. Sometimes it caused a hot discussion, but my wife actually started to acknowledge that she believed too often that she was right and refused to hear me out on sensitive topics. She always wanted us to be honest with each other, even if it was about us downloading a social media app. We had permission and the ability to check each other's phones. I had a video channel from when I was a teenager, and I honestly forgot about it until 3 years into our relationship. When she discovered this old channel, she freaked out on me. She accused me of lying by omission because I never told her about it. I told her she was overreacting because it was old, and I forgot about it. She did not want to hear that she was overreacting. It's like that's all she heard. The day after we were married, a friend of mine reached out to me regarding a video my wife posted on one of these internet apps. I watched it without telling her, then confronted her about having an account without telling me. She immediately became defensive, saying she only posted videos of our dogs. I tried to tell her that wasn't the point, that she'd been the one to say we should tell each other if we join one of these platforms because they tend to be toxic and cause problems in relationships. Now was her opportunity to tell me I was the one overreacting. That's when I told her I saw the video and knew that it wasn't of the dogs, it was of her dancing. She was surprised I saw it and knew the truth, but she didn't let that motivate her to take accountability or admit she lied. Instead, she asked me why I had to turn this into a reason to fight, and said she didn't want me to make a big deal out of this, since she didn't make a big deal out of my video channel. I reminded her that that was from years ago, and this video of her dancing was made the day after our wedding, behind my back. She apologized to me, but it felt forced, like she was cornered into it. That brings us to 10 days after our wedding, when she came home late from work at the bar and showered before laying curled up on the edge of the bed. The bed started shaking a little. It felt like she was stifling her sobs. I sat straight up in bed and asked her if she was okay. She only nodded, trying to cover her face. I turned on the light and stared at her while she cried, expecting her to start talking. She finally admitted she cheated on me, but she didn't say it like that. She said a guy offered to give her a ride home when her car didn't start. She told me she accepted, and that he forced himself on her. I freaked out. I started screaming and crying in disbelief. I told her we were going to the police and needed to find this guy. I asked her if she knew him and what he looked like. She hesitated before answering me. Then she said she didn't want to tell the police because he was a friend of hers. I found it hard to control my breathing, and I started pacing. It was hard for me to clarify the situation with her because a voice in my head kept telling me that she wanted to sleep with this man. She was only sobbing at first because of the guilt she felt, but she couldn't tell me that because she didn't want to suffer the consequences of cheating. It didn't take long for me to start screaming at her to get out. She didn't want to report this friend of hers for forcing himself on her because she didn't want him to go to jail. I asked her repeatedly if she wanted to have sex with this guy, and she said no. When I asked her to give me her phone, she went silent before asking me why. I said I wanted to check her messages, and she became extremely defensive. She wasn't upset anymore. She was mad at me for refusing to trust her. I reminded her that we had a rule between us, that we could always check the other person's phone because trust is continuously earned. I told her she seemed like she was lying and trying to avoid consequences, so by letting me check her phone, she'd prove her innocence. She refused, so I kicked her out. I started shoveling her stuff out onto the sidewalk. I grabbed trash bags and started throwing anything of hers outside, despite her cries for me to stop and listen. She finally snapped, out of anger, not remorse, and told me I was right. She did sleep with him, and he was better than I ever was. That right there was the warped woman my wife had become. Her ego started to inflate until she couldn't resist the temptation to find another man. With all the dating apps and throwaway culture we live in, I wasn't really that surprised. I was just extremely disappointed that it happened to me. I loved this girl, and I know she loved me, but she let her ego control her decision-making and make her believe she shouldn't have to be held accountable or suffer through any repercussions. After the dust settled, I started my own channel, talking about this crisis and how women today are being told they don't have to compromise, respect, or honor their man. As a matter of fact, many women today foolishly believe they don't need a man or any men at all in life. I became pretty popular, which only made my ex jealous and remorseful. Months after I kicked her out of the apartment, she started begging my forgiveness. She wants to get back with me badly, and tells me every day that I was and am the man she's meant to be with. OP, social media, and the internet has helped to spread corruption, immorality, greed, and selfishness. Now it's easy to find support and encouragement to do the wrong thing. People are more than willing to give advice and encouragement to women who justify their own actions or even completely omit what their part in the downfall of the relationship was. There are women who live their lives in complete denial of their own poor behavior and lack of morals. Don't give away the goods before the relationship and commitment is established. Marriage is meant to be selfless, completely fulfilling, and enjoyable. Love yourself and your spouse. When the individual stops thinking that they deserve more, better, or different, and starts living for their spouse's pleasure and joy, the marriage becomes blissful. Each person has their own love language, and if their partner learns and speaks it, and communicates openly with them about their own needs or wants without being demanding, things work out beautifully. Give yourself to your spouse, wholeheartedly, because that's what marriage is. Thanks for sharing with us. Now let's get into our next story for today. My wife, 35 female, and I, 38 male, were married for 11 years. Her father and I worked together for even longer than that, which is how my wife and I met. I went to his house for a work party, and his daughter was there like a prize to be won. When I started talking to her, we hit it off before I knew she was my boss daughter. I stayed late into the night talking with her, until I knew I had to ask her on a date before leaving that night. She accepted. We dated properly, without consummating our relationship, until we were both clearly serious about each other. Neither of us were talking to other people. Neither of us had those toxic social media accounts, and our families knew we belonged together. It was a beautiful relationship, and I felt like I was living life to the fullest with my loyal, honorable woman. Our wedding was a huge, wonderful event, and I wasn't nervous at all. I knew how serious she was about me, and I really felt like we were meant to last forever. Fast forward 10 years, her father was forced to sell his business. He made a considerable amount of money from the sale, and since I was laid off, he gave me a large sum of money. It was enough for my wife and I to live off of for years, so I took my time looking for another job. I actually contemplated retirement or starting my own business from home. After spending all my days at home, I could tell my wife started to get distant and anxious. She wanted to know when I planned on getting out of the house. I asked if there was something she wanted us to do, and she said no. It didn't seem like she wanted to go on a trip with me or get out of the house together. It just seemed like she wanted me to leave for a while. I didn't really get it because we loved each other's company, and the house was big enough that for some of the day, we didn't see each other. We each had some alone time, but I also made sure I paid her adequate attention and spoke her love language. One day, I was reading in the living room when I got a naughty image of my wife airdropped to me from her phone. It made my heart race, but not in a good way. Every bit of this felt wrong, like this picture wasn't intended for me. When she entered the room, I just looked at her and showed her the picture on my phone, waiting to gauge her response. She just smiled and played it off like it was intended to be a pleasant surprise for me. I suggested that next time she comes stand in front of me and start stripping. She just smirked and left the room. I made it my personal mission to check her phone at the next opportunity, so while she was cooking and had her back turned, I grabbed it. I found the same picture I saw, except this one was sent to none other than my former best man. The closest friend I had in this world, the man I asked to be in our wedding. I took screenshots of their flirty conversation. which included comments about how I wouldn't leave the house, and they were both desperate to hook up. Again. My whole world came crumbling down within an hour. I threw her phone at a head-level cabinet beside her, smashing it to bits. She screamed, so I rage-screamed. Her eyes were as big as an owl, and she was as still as one too. I told her she cheated on me, and she was speechless. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew she couldn't deny it either. With her standing there, I sent the screenshots to her father and said I wondered how she was going to get through life without me or her daddy to save her. Her face started to crumble until she was a sobbing heap on the floor. I turned off the stove and told her to start packing her stuff because I was filing for divorce. She turned so white, her skin looked slightly green. She begged me for forgiveness with all the strength she had left. She grabbed my pants and I pulled away. I told her I didn't deserve this heartbreak and disrespect, and that I wouldn't find it in my next wife, no matter how long she committed to me. Marriage is supposed to be beautiful and blissful, not what she turned ours into. She wailed breathless sobs as I pulled her out onto the porch, surrounded by piles of her belongings. She asked me who was coming to get her, and I said I didn't know. That was up to her to figure out. My former best man was married, so it was just 2 hours later that his wife discovered the truth. He was kicked out, and so my wife actually tried to ask him to come get her from my porch, and he cussed her out before blocking her. It was so dramatic and heartbreaking to experience this. I felt like my life became a horrible reality show that I did not relate to. I suddenly despised the woman I loved for so long. She tried calling her father. As soon as he answered, she sounded like a whiny little girl when she called him daddy and tried to paint me as the monster to blame. He scolded her so loudly that I could hear it from the doorway. She tried to interject, but he wouldn't have it. He told her she did not behave like the lady he and her mother raised her to be, and he couldn't fathom how she had the gall and heartlessness to cheat on me, who he called an honorable, respectable man that didn't deserve this devastation and betrayal. He ended the phone call after telling her he would not be coming to save her from facing the consequences of her actions. It was a friend that my wife barely considered a friend that came to her rescue and said she could stay in her spare bedroom. My wife had always bragged to this woman about how lucky she was to have me and the house we lived in. Her dad was the one paying for her car, so she only kept that until he told her to take over the payments. She couldn't afford them, so he took the car back. My ex had it all until her actions reduced her to nothing. I can only wish her luck recovering from such a stupid and unnecessary decision that changed our lives forever. OP, I am so sorry your wife did this to you. Your marriage started off properly and should have worked out. The problem was that your wife was extremely entitled. She probably believed she was a prize to be won and started to feel bored in her married life with you. It doesn't even mean you as her husband did anything wrong. Her ego craved attention and flattery from other men, and what better man than one that stood just behind her husband at the altar? Women can be heartless and cruel when it comes to needing their inflated egos stroked. It isn't enough for these women to be selfless and honorable wives. I'm sure a majority of them don't know the meaning of selflessness, accountability, or what an honorable wife would even do or offer her husband. They are sick and obsessed with themselves. I am sorry that you had to go through this experience. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.